All right, so it's a delightfully snowy April 30th because my province doesn't know how to do spring properly. Why not take a bit to talk about how Christians conceptualize tech use? My last video on this got a great response on Twitter, and some really interesting scripture verses got brought to my attention that I hadn't really considered and didn't include in the original video that I thought I'd address. One of the ones in particular, and I believe it was John Dyer who brought it to my attention, is that the idea that if you consider tech to be sinful because humanity is sinful, then what do we do with the technology that God uses? And that kind of comes at the issue sideways a little bit, but it is something that you have to deal with. It is something that you have to kind of understand and have kind of answers for, because guess what? Jesus uses technology. The verse in question that was brought up to kind of like say that we can't consider it sinful or only sinful, the way I had presented it was a verse where Jesus enters the temple with his disciples and sees the money changers, and then overturns the tables and takes the time to braid a whip of cords and then chase the people out, with the whip of cords. That the braiding of the cords into a whip is the making of a technology in its loosest stance. And I'm fine with that kind of language to describe what technology is, because like I've said, I think in earlier videos, the weaving of fig leaves in the Garden of Eden, that's where I consider like humanity's first technology. So there's a couple ways that I want to address this. The first one is I don't think that technology is sinful by itself because humanity is sinful by itself. And then, when we touch it, we activate that sinfulness. That's not how this works. And I don't think that our sinfulness gets imputed onto the technology. So that, because a sinful person makes, let's say, a gun, the gun is therefore sinful. Because what we'd see then is that the sinfulness of like the cords being made, because even cordage is a technology, the sinfulness of the cords would be imputed into the whip that Christ used, and how could he use it if it was sinful? That kind of problem. I don't think that. I don't think that technology is inherently sinful or inherently evil the way that human beings are inherently sinful. I believe that it's an extension of mankind. And that's a different kind of perception of what technology is. We've all heard the old adage, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And you'll have some like boomer right-wing guy on Facebook saying that he put his gun on his porch and his gun didn't kill anybody, because, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Yeah, but guns don't also do what guns do without people. That's the kind of issue that we're seeing, is that, technology doesn't do what technology is supposed to do without people's involvement, without people's activation, that kind of stuff. That's where I see where, if we consider technology sinful, because for the most part, with some rare exceptions of what Christ did in his lifetime, all the technology, especially the advanced technology that we have now, computerization, AI, the internet, digitization of most of our lives, that kind of stuff, that does not come from a place where, we have an abundance of Christian thought or Christian background, that kind of stuff. That we have, atheists and sinners making these technologies, and that it's the extension of them that we're having to deal with. When Christ uses it, though, and this is key, when Christ takes the cords and braids a whip, what we have is a rare instance of a sinless human making technology. That opens up an entirely new way of thinking about what technology is, because we can't get back to that without going to Christ for a sacrifice on our behalf for our sins. Whereas Christ, being born of a virgin, so he doesn't have Adam's sin imputed onto him because of hereditary nature, that kind of stuff. Because Adam doesn't have that, because Jesus does not have that sin, he can make technology, even technology that would be expressly sinful and like would have sinful ends. He can make that technology and then use it for, and in this case it's almost touching. He can use it for proper worship. He was fixing the worship that was happening at the temple by driving out the money changers because it had gotten perverse. He was fixing that by using technology in the context of worship. And that's my kind of like thing where like God makes clothing for Adam and Eve after they attempted to make clothing by weaving the fig leaves. He does it in the context of this, worship. That string of worship kind of works through there. And then we see Jesus using technology other times expressly for how he's teaching and how he's doing his ministry. One would argue worship. Before he feeds the crowd with the loaves and the fishes, what does he do? He puts out off from shore in a boat so that he can address the crowd, to give distance and to be able to properly, so everyone could see him because they were just like crowding around him, that kind of thing. He wasn't using the boat for what a boat's for. The boat was for fishing, but he was using the fact that the boat floats, and so that the boat could grant distance so that people could all see him, that kind of thing. That's another example of Christ in the context of kind of like God's work, using technology the way that it can be used as opposed to the way it's not used. When we talk about how technology is sinful because humans are sinful and because technology is an extension of man, it's an extension of our sinfulness. And I do really mean that it's an extension of our innate sinfulness, the stuff that we can't do anything about, because there's plenty of sins that you don't do. There's plenty of sins that Christians don't have to worry about because they don't struggle with it, or they don't have the opportunity to commit it. All those like those sins of commission, or sins of omission. But even down to people who have never touched anything, those people are still born with a sinful nature that needs to be atoned for by Christ. And that's what I mean when I say that we have to consider technology sinful the same way humans are, because it is an extension of man. We don't have to consider technology that's made by unsinful people as sinful, because it doesn't have to worry about that sinfulness getting into it, the extensions of itself. On the contrary, Christ's technology can be exercised in ways that we can't fathom because he doesn't have a sinful nature. And that's not just some cosmic hall pass that allows Jesus to do things that would be sinful for us to do. That's Jesus being able to use technology for what it's supposed to be used for, especially in the context of worship. And I know that's a hard precept to understand, to be able to perceive technology as an extension of the human body. But the second you do, you understand that, Jesus would use technology. He would braid a whip, and he would chase out the evildoers from the temple, because the temple was a holy place, and he was trying to make it holy. He was trying to keep it holy, that kind of thing. But whereas if we were to do that, that would be violence, as opposed to, that would be wrath, that would be all kinds of sin, because we have a sin nature. We can't do those things with technology because we have the sin nature, because our sin nature will get imputed onto the technology that we have and the technology that we're trying to do. This is why it's like, you can use social media as a Christian for Christian things, but I don't think there could ever be a Christian or like a godly social media site, because we have a sin nature that will always kind of trend towards that. And we saw that happen in real time. The Bible app, of all places, YouVersion, had a social media feature where you could have friends and you could have reading parties or reading partners and stuff like that, and share your progress. And then you could like take pictures of things and put Bible verses on, and immediately it got kind of like infiltrated by sexual predators and people trying to use it as a backdoor to get to people, especially minors, when they were doing while they were using that kind of stuff. There were ways to like find pornographic content on the Bible app, of all things. Why? Because social media as a technology is inherently sinful, because the people who made it, people who are trying to make like the Bible in a digital form, are still inherently sinful. And that's what happens to technology. There's this need for redemption, this need for like pointing things to Christ in ways that have to be like wrenched from it in order to be able to use them for evil purposes, to make them so Christ focused that you can't use them for sinful purposes. That's the kind of distinction that I'm talking about. That's the kind of, it's not corruption. It's an extension of what human beings are, and that's the thing that's hard to perceive, is that there's always going to be kind of an evil slant. There's always going to be a sinful slant to what technology that mankind makes can possibly do. And just because we find examples of Christ making technology doesn't mean those same rules, those same observable things about how technology works apply to Christ, because Christ himself did not have that sin. He could righteously use a whip, where we would struggle to righteously use a whip, and it's and when we take that example of righteously using the whip to hurt people, to get them out of the temple because they were doing evil, and that was the righteous, godly thing to do because we had Christ demonstrating that. Well, where's the parallel to that? How can we see that? Well, we'll go right back to that first instance that we were talking about, where, Adam and Eve were making, clothing to hide their sin, to hide their shame out of fig leaves. And what does God do? Well, he issues punishment, and he, puts the curse on humanity. But then he takes animal skins. He had to kill those animals. He had to kill those. That means that there are righteous ways to kill things, that God has those righteous ways to kill things, that perhaps we would have righteous ways to kill things had we not a sinful nature. And then he kills the animals and puts the skins on them. And, a lot of scholars think that was the first sacrifice. And I think those two are held in tension to show a continuity between Jesus and God in the Old Testament in Genesis, that they're acting the same way with technology and acting in the same way with regards to technology. That, it's an extension of who they are to do these things that are hard from a righteous and holy perspective, that it's an extension of those things. It's an extension of that holiness and that righteousness. Whereas when we do technology, unless it is pointed towards the gospel and to that redemption, that it usually ends up trending towards sin anyway, because it's an extension of our sin. So I know that's kind of high topic stuff. I hope that kind of explains where, it all kind of lands. And it's a bit of a longer video at 12 minutes. I try to keep these about 10 minutes. But yeah, being able to perceive what technology is, especially when we can witness that God himself, as a man, as fully man, like Jesus was, also participates in the making and use of technology. Understanding those kind of dynamics is important, because it will inform us what to do when new technologies are placed on our hands that come to us as if they can be used neutrally or for good purposes, because really they can't right away. They have to be assessed through not only the lens of the gospel, but also the lens of can this be pointed towards the redemptive work of Christ, the way that a whip can, or the way that a sacrifice and the animal hides from that can. Can those things get pointed towards the redemptive work of Christ? Can all technology do that? If we're not asking that question, then all we're doing is having a concept of what the technology is, and you can hide anything in that concept. You can hide all sorts of good motives for evil things. And then, you end up compromised because, again, you didn't deal with the fact that as sinful humans, technology is just an extension of that sinful human. Whereas, what Christ models for us is that you can have technology which is an extension of yourself, that is rooted in the holiness of Christ. That if we root ourselves in that redemptive work, while we're pursuing use of technology or creation of technology, that fixes that problem of the sin being a part of the extension that is technology. That instead of sin being part of that extension, that the redemption and the redemptive work of Christ can be a part of that extension in technology. And that's how we should be looking at technology. That's what we should be demanding of technology. And that's what we should be looking for in absence. That if it does not have that kind of slant, that kind of direction towards the redemptive work of Christ, and it can't adopt that. It can't be made into a redemptive work. That it is something that we need to like not use just blindly. That it needs something that we have to use carefully because we have that sinful slant that will be inherent in the creation and the use of that technology because it is an extension of sinful man. So I know it's kind of heady and high topic, but I hope that explains things, and hope you guys have a better day than I have. Because like, look at this garbage. Look at this. This is like May tomorrow. Ugh.